The 1980s gave us horror at its wildest, bold, bloody, and often too much for the public to bear. Some films went beyond scares, sparking protests, police raids, and censorship campaigns that forced theaters to yank them almost overnight. What kind of movie could be so shocking it was erased mid-run? Tonight, we're uncovering horror films of the 80s that theaters couldn't handle. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. When Umberto Lenzi's Cannibal Ferox hit theaters, it didn't arrive quietly. Advertised as the most violent film ever made, the movie immediately drew morbid curiosity from hardcore horror fans. But almost as quickly, it attracted outrage. The Italian exploitation shocker was accused of reveling in savagery, crossing lines audiences hadn't even realized existed. Within weeks, screenings in the US and Europe were abruptly canceled. The film's reputation stemmed from its jungle setting and its relentless brutality. At the time, audiences had already endured the likes of Cannibal Holocaust, but Ferox doubled down. Graphic depictions of torture and cruelty sparked rumors that some scenes were real. That whisper campaign of snuff authenticity only fueled protests. In Britain, it became one of the infamous video nasties banned outright under the 1984 Video Recordings Act. He argued the story was an attack on greed and corruption, exposing the savagery lurking within so-called civilized people. Even seasoned horror buffs admitted that Cannibal Ferox went too far. The more governments and theaters tried to bury it, the more collectors sought it out. Bootleg copies circulated in back rooms and video rental shops, turning the film into a forbidden prize. Its notoriety outweighed its artistic value, an example of how horror's darkest excesses can provoke fear outside the screen itself. Pulled from theaters and condemned by critics, it remains proof that when horror goes too far, society pushes back. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead may be a cult masterpiece today, but its early theatrical run was anything but smooth. In 1981, audiences weren't prepared for its relentless gore and demonic terror. While some critics marveled at Raimi's inventive camera work and Bruce Campbell's raw intensity, local censors saw it as dangerous. In towns across the US and Europe, screenings were abruptly halted after community complaints. Unlike exploitative jungle horrors of the era, The Evil Dead was made with passion and style. Raimi, just 22 years old, used unorthodox techniques, mounting cameras on planks, dragging them through swamps, and applying gallons of practical effects to create an unrelenting nightmare. What unsettled censors most wasn't just the blood, it was the sheer intensity, a non-stop assault that audiences weren't used to. The UK placed it squarely on the infamous Video Nasties list, where it remained in limbo for years. Ironically, this censorship only amplified its reputation. Horror fans whispered about it like contraband. Campbell's portrayal of Ash, bloodied, terrified, yet unyielding, would later cement him as an icon of the genre. Yet in 1981, few could see past the controversy. For many, The Evil Dead wasn't art, it was an affront. And yet, history has flipped that judgment on its head. Once pulled from theaters as too extreme, the film now sits proudly in the canon of horror innovation. It proved that even the smallest production, if fueled by vision and fearlessness, can terrify the world. Night of the Creeps, 1986. Fred Decker's Night of the Creeps should have been a breakout hit. It had everything: alien parasites, campus slashers, and a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor that paid homage to the B-movies of the 1950s. When it premiered in 1986, its mix of horror and comedy confused audiences. Ticket sales slumped, and many theaters quietly removed it. The premise is wild. Alien slugs infect human hosts, turning them into zombies. College students, with the help of a hard-bitten detective, must save the day. Today, that setup feels like perfect cult material. But in 1986, mainstream audiences didn't know what to make of it. Was it horror? Was it comedy? The confusion left theaters scrambling to justify showing it. Adding to its rocky journey were censors uncomfortable with its gore. Though tame by today's standards, its parasite-driven body horror unsettled more conservative moviegoers. Behind the scenes, Decker poured his heart into the project, filling it with affectionate nods to classic horror and sci-fi. Cast members like Tom Atkins gave memorable performances, but marketing was muddled and the film was left adrift. For years, Night of the Creeps seemed doomed to be forgotten. But VHS tapes kept the spark alive. Fans passed it around, quoting its now legendary line, "Thrill me." Though theaters pulled it prematurely, Night of the Creeps endured, proving that some films are simply ahead of their time. Its resurrection as a beloved cult classic is a reminder that even cinema's cast-offs can find immortality. Dead and Buried, 1981. At first glance, Dead and Buried looked like an atmospheric small-town horror mystery. In the UK, it was labeled a video nasty, leading to bans and theater withdrawals. The story follows a coastal town where corpses mysteriously reappear, seemingly alive. What begins as a quiet thriller escalates into a gruesome nightmare, anchored by one of the decade's most shocking autopsy sequences. Many theaters, especially in conservative areas, refuse to finish scheduled runs. Ironically, this craftsmanship is what doomed the film's theatrical life. Instead of admiring the artistry, audiences and censors recoiled. Behind the scenes, Sherman wanted to blend gothic mystery with modern horror, but his vision was overshadowed by the scandal. Even the marketing, which teased it as a terrifying new kind of horror, backfired. And police raids on video shops in the UK turned it into contraband. In time, Dead and Buried was rediscovered by horror fans who recognized its artistry. Pulled from theaters for being too real, it is now celebrated for its atmosphere and shocking finale. Maniac, 1980. Few films captured the fury of critics and audiences in the 1980s like Maniac. This grim portrait of a serial killer prowling New York City was described by one reviewer as, and many chains refused to screen it altogether. Where it did open, theaters often pulled it within days. A lonely man driven to murder women in brutal fashion. The story was less about supernatural scares and more about raw psychological horror. What disturbed audiences wasn't just the violence, it was the intimacy of it. Effects legend Tom Savini provided graphic murder sequences, including a notorious shotgun blast scene that left viewers shaken, singling it out in televised reviews. Feminist groups protested its depictions of violence against women. His performance, both pitiful and terrifying, gave the film a weight that many missed beneath the controversy. Lustig later admitted the movie was meant to be a character study, not just a gore fest, but public opinion drowned out nuance. Though ripped from theaters, Maniac found a second life in midnight screenings and VHS rentals. Over time, it became recognized as a chilling urban horror, reflecting the fears of a decaying New York. Maniac proved that horror doesn't need the supernatural to horrify. Sometimes reality is what people find too unbearable to watch. The Beyond, 1981. Lucio Fulci's The Beyond was never meant for casual audiences. It plunged viewers into a nightmare of surreal terror where logic collapsed and horror reigned. L'Aldilà, it faced brutal censorship worldwide, and in the US, many theaters pulled it after bewildered audiences and outraged critics protested its unrelenting violence. Set in a cursed Louisiana hotel built over one of the 7 gates of hell, the story unfolds as a cascade of grotesque visions, flesh-eating spiders, melting faces, and unholy resurrections. Fulci's intent wasn't to tell a coherent story, but to assault the senses. This approach baffled viewers in 1981. Some dismissed it as incoherent trash. Others were horrified by its sheer audacity. The film's special effects became the primary reason for bans. Even edited versions couldn't satisfy censors who believed its atmosphere was sadistic. In Britain, it was labeled a video nasty and pulled from shelves. Behind the camera, Fulci defended his vision, calling horror, he believed the irrational was more frightening than logic. Over time, The Beyond developed a cult following, especially among fans who saw its nightmarish imagery as pure cinematic art. What was once yanked from theaters for being unbearable is now hailed as one of the greatest Italian horror films ever made. The Beyond teaches us that sometimes the very qualities that get a movie pulled are what later ensure its immortality. Possession, 1981. At the top of our list is Andrzej Żuławski's Possession, a film so disturbing, so psychologically and visually unrelenting that theaters around the world pulled it within days. Released in 1981, this Polish-French production, starring Isabelle Adjani and Sam Neill, masqueraded as a story of marital breakdown. What it became was one of the most unsettling horror films of the decade, blending divorce drama, political allegory, and nightmarish body horror. On paper, it was the story of Anna and Mark, a couple unraveling in West Berlin. But as the film spiraled, audiences watched Adjani descend into hysteria. Rumors spread of fainting and vomiting in theaters. Several distributors, overwhelmed by complaints, yanked it from screens. Anna's mysterious affair with an inhuman creature created by effects, Master Carlo Rambaldi pushed the film into grotesque territory, merging eroticism, despair, and monstrosity. Many censors didn't know what to make of it, or was it madness? In Britain, Possession landed on the infamous Video Nasties list. Żuławski himself was dismayed. Adjani's performance is now regarded as one of the greatest in horror history, feral, terrifying, and heartbreaking. The very scenes that once got it banned are today studied in film schools. Pulled from theaters for being too disturbing, Possession proves that sometimes the films that break us most deeply are the ones that endure longest in memory. It is horror, not as escapism, but as confrontation with love, loss, and madness itself.